2:38 a.m. in the English Channel. The closing speed is 42 knots. The Russian frigate Admiral Grigorovich has just executed a violent 40-degree turn to starboard, placing its 3,620-ton hull directly across the bow of the British tanker RFA Tide Spring, leaving a clearance of less than 300 meters. A collision at this velocity would instantly rupture the double hulls of both vessels, releasing 40,000 tons of marine diesel into a shipping lane that handles 500 commercial vessels daily, creating an environmental catastrophe that would drain billions in cleanup funds and cripple the European energy supply chain for 6 months. The immediate failure of the British vessel to yield signals the total collapse of the NATO blockade, yet allowing the Russian shadow fleet to transport illicit oil worth hundreds of millions of dollars directly to the buyers funding an active war. On the bridge of the British ship, the radar officer is watching the red warning light strobe. The distance to impact is counting down in meters, and the order to turn hard to port is caught in the throat of the officer of the watch. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. We must care because this is not merely a navigational near miss. It is a physical test of the West's ability to enforce economic sanctions in the modern era. The stakes are measured in the tangible degradation of international law, the diversion of critical naval assets from global hotspots to monitor a single strait, and the real risk of a kinetic engagement that could escalate from a bumper-bumper scrape to a live-fire exchange within seconds. The single irreversible moment is the Russian decision to arm a commercial escort mission with a frontline warship equipped with anti-ship missiles, effectively daring the West to fire the first shot. This confrontation permanently alters the calculus of maritime warfare, proving that the digital battle space is no longer a support layer, but the primary theater of conflict. The threat is not theoretical, it is armored, fueled, and sailing within visual range of the cliffs of Dover. To understand how we arrived at a standoff involving nuclear-capable powers, we must first examine the physical reality of the Russian asset. The Admiral Grigorovich is a Project 11356 frigate displacing 3,620 tons of water and measuring 124 meters in length. It is powered by a Kodog propulsion system, combining gas turbines for high-speed sprints and diesel engines for cruising efficiency, allowing it to reach speeds of 30 knots. It is armed with 83M54 Caliber NK anti-ship missiles, each capable of traveling at Mach 2.9 at terminal velocity to strike a target 400 kilometers away. It is equipped with the 3S-14 vertical launch system and the Frigate M2M3 radar suite, designed to track multiple targets simultaneously while guiding lethal munitions. This vessel is not a Coast Guard cutter, it is a dedicated killing machine, and it is currently using that deadliness to protect a convoy of aging oil tankers attempting to breach a sanctions line. If you look at the maritime traffic maps for the region, you will see the Grigorovich moving at a flank speed of 30 knots, cutting through the designated separation lane, acting as a battering ram to clear a path for the commercial vessels following in its wake. The British response is hampered by the nature of the opposition vessel. The RFA Tide Spring is a Tide-class replenishment tanker, a massive 37,000-ton support ship designed to refuel other ships, not to dodge high-speed interceptors. It has a turning circle measured in miles, not meters, a vessel of 37,000 tons traveling at 18 knots, possesses over 1 billion joules of kinetic energy. Bringing that mass to a halt requires nearly 3 miles of water. When the Grigorovich turned across its bow, it exploited the fundamental physics of inertia. The tanker simply could not stop in time, forcing the British crew into a terrifying game of chicken where the only options were collision or extreme evasive action. The situation escalated at 2:45 a.m., shifting from a physical confrontation to a digital siege. Moscow had planned this operation with layers of deception, anticipating the eyes of the West would be fixed on the strait. As the Grigorovich began its aggressive maneuver, it activated the TK-2-55 electronic warfare suite, a system designed to flood the local electromagnetic spectrum with high-power noise. Simultaneously, the fleet deployed a sophisticated AIS spoofing protocol. The automatic identification system is the transponder system that broadcasts a ship's identity, position, and course on VHF frequencies to prevent collisions. The Russians hacked this system to broadcast multiple phantom identities for every real ship. Imagine a magician throwing a handful of flash powder into the audience to obscure the stage. To the AIS receivers on British and civilian ships, the Russian fleet suddenly multiplied. One oil tanker appeared as 5 distinct contacts. The frigate appeared as 3 fishing trawlers and a container ship. This created a matrix of clutter, paralyzing the decision-making loop of the British commanders who could no longer distinguish between a real threat and a digital ghost. This is the core of the Russian strategy: to overwhelm the enemy's sensors with data until the enemy cannot see the reality in front of them. By 2:50 a.m., the Alliance countered this digital fog with a superior layering of surveillance technology. The deception relied on the assumption that the Alliance was relying only on surface-based radar and standard transponder data. However, the United States Navy had deployed a Boeing P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, a militarized 737 loaded with advanced sensors flying at 25,000 feet. The Poseidon activated its AN/APY-10 radar, but more critically, it utilized synthetic aperture radar. To understand why this mattered, imagine traditional radar is like shining a flashlight in a dark room. You see what the light hits. SAR is different. It uses the motion of the aircraft to synthesize a much larger antenna, effectively taking a high-resolution photograph of the ocean surface that can penetrate the smoke and haze generated by the Russian decoys. By processing the Doppler shift of the reflected radar waves caused by the aircraft's motion, the system can distinguish a stationary decoy from a moving warship. It sees the physical shape of the hull, regardless of what electronic label is painted on it. Alongside the Poseidon, a Northrop Grumman MQ-4C Triton drone operating in the stratosphere at 60,000 feet deployed its MTSB multispectral targeting system. This sensor looks for heat signatures, not radar reflections. The ocean is cold, hovering around 10 degrees Celsius. A ship's engine exhaust is hot, exceeding 400 degrees. To the Triton's infrared eyes, the Russian decoys, which were just small emitters floating on balloons, were invisible against the cold water, while the massive thermal bloom of the Grigorovich and its tankers burned like flares in the night. The data from these sensors was fused through the Link 16 tactical data link, a secure digital network that shares information between all Allied assets in real time using J-series messages. If you look at the tactical display in the command center, you would see the Russian electronic clutter filtering away in layers, leaving behind the precise, unambiguous tracks of the real vessels. The Russian deception operation was stripped naked in seconds. 10 supposed targets were reduced to 3 real ships. The Phantom Fleet evaporated, leaving the actual task force exposed and isolated. This was not just a victory of intelligence, it was a demonstration of asymmetrical warfare, where the Alliance's network-centric architecture defeated the Russian brute force electronic jamming. The Russians had brought a knife to a gunfight, and they had just realized they were out of range. At 2:52 a.m., the Russians attempted to escalate vertically to break the surveillance lock. 2 Sukhoi Su-30 SM flanker fighters were scrambled from the Kaliningrad enclave, a heavily militarized Russian territory on the Baltic coast. These are heavy twin-engine multi-role fighters capable of sustaining 9G turns, meaning they can pull 9 times the force of gravity in a turn without breaking apart. Their mission was to intercept the British Eurofighter Typhoon. that had been shadowing the fleet from Coningsby Air Base. The Su-30SM pilot executed a dangerous maneuver, flying within meters of the British jet and performing a headbutt maneuver. This involves flying across the opponent's flight path at close range to create a dangerous situation. When the specific threat here was jet wash or turbulent air, by flying in front of the Typhoon and engaging afterburners, the Russian pilot was attempting to force the hot, high-velocity exhaust gases directly into the intake of the British aircraft's engines. This can cause a compressor surge, a flameout, or a catastrophic engine failure, effectively blinding the British pilot without firing a shot. It is a form of kinetic intimidation. However, the British response was grounded in a technological generation gap that the Russians had underestimated. The Typhoon did not attempt to physically match the Russian maneuver. Instead, the British pilot activated the BAE System Striker 2 helmet-mounted display system. This is a piece of hardware that projects flight and targeting information onto the pilot's visor, allowing them to look at a target and lock onto it simply by turning their head. It uses eye-tracking technology to ensure the weapon is slaved to the pilot's gaze with a 1280 by 1024 pixel resolution display. Simultaneously, the Typhoon engaged its Captor E radar, specifically the burn-through mode. The Captor E is an active electronically scanned array radar operating in the X-band. When the Russians attempted to jam the British radar with their L-175V Hibny electronic countermeasure pods, the Captor E concentrated its electromagnetic energy into a narrow, high-intensity beam, overpowering the jamming signal with brute force. This is similar to trying to shout over someone in a noisy room. If you yell loud enough and direct it enough, the person can still hear you. The Typhoon's radar pierced the jamming, impeding the Su-30SM with a continuous target lock. The result was a locked-on warning, screaming in the cockpit of the Russian jet. Even though the Su-30 was flying at a 90-degree angle to the Typhoon, a position where traditional missiles could not track, the British Meteor missile did not care. The Meteor is a beyond visual range missile equipped with a throttleable, ducted rocket ramjet engine. Unlike a standard rocket motor that burns out in seconds, a ramjet breathes air like a jet engine, allowing it to throttle up and accelerate throughout its flight. It creates a no-escape zone 3 times larger than older American AMRAAM missiles, reaching speeds of Mach 4 in the terminal phase. To the Russian pilot, the realization that he was targeted by a missile he could not outrun or outmaneuver was immediate. The Russian electronic warfare designed to cloak them had failed. The Russian physical aggression designed to intimidate had been countered by a digital lock-on that required no violent maneuver from the British side. The flanker broke off and disengaged, retreating back to Kaliningrad. The sky belonged to the Alliance, but the most deadly phase of the confrontation was unfolding beneath the waves at 3:02 a.m. While the surface ships danced and the aircraft buzzed, a Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine, known in NATO circles as the Black Hole for its extreme quietness, was stalking the area. The Kilo-class is renowned for its anechoic tile coating, rubber-like tiles on the hull that absorb sound waves instead of reflecting them, making the submarine nearly invisible to sonar. It is powered by 2 columna diesel generators and a single electric motor, driving a single 7-bladed propeller designed to minimize cavitation. This specific vessel had slipped out of the Baltijsk naval base days prior, moving underwater to take up a firing position on the Allied fleet. The Russian commander knew that the safest way to approach a sonar net is to hide in the noise. He positioned his submarine directly underneath a busy commercial shipping lane, matching his speed to the passing cargo ships. By hiding in the acoustic shadow of the massive propellers of a freighter, he hoped to mask his own engine noise. To further confuse the hunters, the submarine deployed a series of acoustic decoys. These are small devices that eject from the submarine and swim away, broadcasting a recording of a U.S. Virginia-class submarine. You imagine a burglar playing a recording of a dog barking to throw off the police dogs. The goal was to trick the Alliance's sonar operators into chasing ghosts, allowing the Kilo to slip into a firing position on the British surface ships. The trap failed because the Alliance had anticipated this exact acoustic camouflage. The U.S. Navy fast attack submarine USS Virginia was already trailing the Kilo, having tracked it from the moment it passed through the shallow waters of the Skagerrak Strait. The Virginia utilizes a sail-mounted photonics mast instead of a traditional periscope, sending high-definition video to the control room via fiber optics, allowing it to remain submerged while maintaining visual awareness. Instead of relying solely on passive listening, which can be fooled by decoys, the Alliance utilized a multi-static sonar system deployed from the P-8 Poseidon aircraft. This involved dropping a pattern of sonobuoys, floating sensors, that communicate with each other. This creates an active sound field. If you think of passive sonar as listening in a dark room, multi-static sonar is like setting up a laser security grid in a museum. You don't need to hear the intruder, you detect them when they break the beams of light connecting the sensors. The Russian submarine, moving silently, was still a physical object made of steel. As it passed through the network of sonobuoys, it disrupted the sound pulses traveling between them. To the USS Virginia, the Kilo did not look like a ship. It looked like a moving hole in the water, in a silhouette against a background of sound. The precise tracking of this silhouette revealed the submarine's position, speed, and depth with pinpoint accuracy. Realizing they had been detected and that a torpedo lock was imminent, the Russian commander abandoned the attack. The Kilo executed an emergency deep dive, fleeing the area at maximum speed. The Predator had been hunted. With the air and sea domains secured, the final phase of the operation began at 3:15 a.m. This was the decapitation of the Russian command and control capabilities. The U.S. Navy launched a Boeing EA-18G Growler, an electronic warfare aircraft derived from the F/A-18 Super Hornet. The crew of the Growler includes an electronic warfare officer, a specialist dedicated solely to manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum. The Growler carries the ALQ-249 next-generation jammer, a pod-mounted system that represents the cutting edge of electronic attack. The Russian fleet, realizing their spoofing had failed, attempted to escalate their jamming to blind the Alliance entirely. The Admiral Grigorovich and the accompanying Vishnya-class intelligence ship attempted to create an electromagnetic vice, saturating the frequency bands used by the Allied ships and aircraft. They aimed to render the Allies deaf and dumb, unable to communicate or target. The ALQ-249 system does not just shout back, it listens and learns. It uses cognitive electronic warfare techniques to analyze the Russian jamming signals in real time, identifying the specific waveforms and modulation patterns being used. Once the pattern was recognized, the Growler executed a mechaning attack. It did not block the Russian signal, it received it, amplified it, and retransmitted it back to the source with slight delays and corrupted data packets. This is the digital equivalent of pointing a mirror at a hypnotist. The Russian jamming beams were hijacked and used as a carrier wave to inject malware and false data directly into the Russian combat network. The Russian radar screens began to show ghost targets that didn't exist. Their internal communication networks began to broadcast looped, confusing messages. To prevent a total meltdown of their fire control systems, the Russian operators were forced to shut down their radar and communication arrays entirely. By fighting the Alliance's electronic warfare, they had blinded themselves. The coup de grace came at 3:25 a.m. with the Russian sensors offline. The Growler transmitted a specific narrowband signal directly into the receiver arrays of the Admiral Grigorovich. This signal mimicked the radar signature of a massive salvo, of incoming anti-ship missiles. To the Russian crew, sitting in the darkened information center with their main radars silenced, their missile warning receivers suddenly went to maximum alert. Their screens showed dozens of high-speed projectiles closing in on their ship seconds from impact. In reality, the sky was empty. There were no missiles. This was a purely psychological injection, a digital phantom designed to break the will of the commander. If you look at the bridge of the frigate during those minutes, you would see a crew frozen in terror, waiting for an explosion that never came. In the midst of this chaos, a simple text message was pushed to their internal displays. "Hello, we see you very clearly." The Russian will to fight evaporated in that moment. They had been outsmarted, out-teched, and outmaneuvered on every level of warfare. The Admiral Grigorovich and the oil tankers were forced to reduce speed and turn off their spoofing systems. They broke formation and proceeded under the watchful eye of the Allied fleet, effectively prisoners being escorted out of the exclusion zone. By dawn, the Russian state media was spinning a narrative of a heroic breakthrough, claiming they had successfully breached the blockade, but the physical reality told a different story. The ships had been forced to operate at a crawl, their electronic capabilities had been neutralized, and they had been humiliatingly exposed. The Admiral Grigorovich arrived at its destination hours late and electronically castrated, a hollow threat floating in water it no longer controlled. The collision that seemed inevitable at 2:38 a.m. was avoided, but the cost of survival for the Russian task force was the total loss of their operational secrecy and dignity. Warfare is no longer a contest of physical mass, but a contest of information processing. And in the English Channel that night, one side proved it had already won the war before the first shot was ever fired.